Do women think it feminine to be so illogical, or can't they help it?
I guess they just can't help it.
HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. In the Greek myth of Pandora's box, as told by Hesiod's Works and Days, the world was fundamentally changed by the single action of a young woman. Pandora, a creation of the gods, had been gifted with a spectrum of traits, including curiosity. Giving in to her curious impulses, she opened a jar left in her care and unleashed countless troubles, diseases, and pain upon the world, only closing it in time to retain hope. The myth is supposed to be a representation of humanity's weaknesses and an explanation for those troubles. Imagine if that story had been written in 2020. Feminist outrage would most certainly echo from the four directions.
What in the world is wrong with you?
Why, that Hesiod guy must be some kind of alt-right Nazi male supremacist incel. How could somebody get women so profoundly wrong? Doesn't that guy realize a woman's jar wouldn't be filled with diseases and death? That's just his male privilege speaking. Obviously, the real story should have been that Pandora found within the jar some profound truth, a very special truth, her truth in fact, one that transcended fact and logic to validate her entire outlook on life. And Pandora lived happily ever after. The end, you misogynistic shitlords. So there. The thing is, truth did come out of that jar, and a profound one at that, though maybe a bit hard for some to handle.
Are you insane?
What if Pandora had chosen not to give in to her curiosity-driven impulse? According to Hesiod, ere this, the tribes of men lived on earth remote and free from ills and hard toil and heavy sickness which bring the fates upon men. For in misery, men grow old quickly. Life before Pandora sounds pretty cushy, doesn't it? She changed all that just by lifting the lid on one jar. Itty-bitty action, phenomenal cosmic consequences. Pandora's actions mattered, even when what she did was ultimately harmful and damaging rather than benevolent. Her sex did not change that. Modern society does a terrible job of recognizing that truth. Feminists treat it like some kind of a plague. Generations of girls have been raised without a full understanding of it. While this problem isn't universal, our culture largely raises its children very differently depending on their sex. Boys grow up learning to find their value as people in what benefit they contribute to their communities. They're expected to learn a measure of personal accountability by adulthood, as their place in their communities will largely be based on how they choose to contribute and how their choices impact their fellow citizens. Girls, on the other hand, are all too often raised to measure their value by other people's interest in them and to feel entitled to validation of that value. In our culture, people are shamed for not valuing girls and women just by virtue of their sex. Personal agency isn't required for a woman to have a place in her community. It's built in, and if you tell her otherwise, you're a misogynist. Then, women's advocates wonder why top government offices, CEOs, and other positions of top authority in our society are mostly filled by men. They assure the girls of the world that the reason for this has nothing to do with women's choices. It is pure sexism, and the only way to fix it is for those selfish, sexist boys to stop hogging all the glory.
Yes, ma'am.
If that were the case, there'd be nothing women could do about it but complain and rely on ethical men to fix the problem for them. Because if women's choices don't affect the outcomes of their endeavors, they must not matter at all. Any results, any consequences could be solely attributed to men. After all, if women's actions don't matter, whose fault must everything be? What a terrible thing to do to both sexes, teaching future women that their actions don't matter, priming them to define themselves as victims of any consequences, and then unleashing their havoc on men and the civilization they are responsible for stewarding. One of the most important aspects of a child's upbringing, all too often neglected in raising girls, is the development of personal accountability. It's the key to reaching one's greatest potential and the potential to steer clear of one's greatest failures. Why should real women's life stories be deprived of it in any measure? Poor Pandora never had a chance. Her traits were bestowed upon her by the gods. She was created and molded to do exactly what she did, tuned like a wind-up doll and set on her disastrous path. Should we not do better for our daughters? This week, HBR Talk will discuss teaching girls to associate the consequences of their choices with themselves, and not just think about the expected benefits. We'll discuss why that's important not just to them, but to the men, children, and other women their lives will impact. We stream on multiple platforms. You can tune in to the live stream on YouTube via the link in the low bar, or find other viewing and listening options on BadgerFeed.com.